All right. So our topic today is debunking homeownership misconceptions for clients relocating from out of the area. So people are used to certain things where they're from, right? They've got different expectations about how the process is going to play out. They have different misconceptions about how, different parts of that process, like inspections, closing, attorney, lenders, all of that is going to play out. So I want to kind of go line by line and talk about a few things. And thank you again, Ellen, for helping put this together. You did most of the legwork on this, and see what everyone has to add, thoughts on it, questions on it, and see if we need to put anything else on the list. So I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see this, and we'll go kind of line by line and just talk through it. Can everybody see it okay?
Yep.
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 Okay. Let me just get my screen so I can see you guys a little bit better. Okay, fantastic. So right off the top, septic tanks is a great place to start, right? Because I'm sure we've all worked with a client, or if you haven't yet, you will at some point, and you say septic tank, and they say, oh, heck no, I'm not interested in that at all. Septic tanks are absolutely fine. It really comes down to, like several items on this list that we're going to talk about, it's just the area. In more established areas where the municipalities are more frequent or larger or overlapping, you have a lot more public infrastructure, right? So you've got city, county, whatever septic systems or sewer systems that all the homes are connected to, right? Because they're just lined up down the street. It's like a regular neighborhood. Versus, here we have some more rural areas, unincorporated areas that don't have those public systems in place. So I always try to normalize it. I will say that I'm on septic, and hopefully that, I can explain my experience with it and really what it takes. Because it's just like anything else that's part of your house. It needs regular maintenance, right? I treat my septic once a quarter, and it's just something you buy at the grocery store and you flush it down the toilet, and it's just the enzymes and the stuff that keep the bacteria in there healthy so they do what they got to do. It's suggested that you have it pumped once about every 5 years, which is what I've done as long as I've lived on a septic. Now, Ellen, I don't really know the Title V stuff that you mentioned, so I'd love for you to enlighten us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So Title V, this may just be a Massachusetts thing, but basically it's a law that says that based on the age of the septic tank, you may very well have to have the tank removed and a new tank put in.
Oh.
So it's an inspection that has to happen when you're purchasing, at any time of purchase, when you're flipping the house. And it's a Title V inspection. If it fails inspection, the whole system has to be replaced. So needless to say, it was pretty taboo. When you heard septic tank, it's like, yeah, no, I'll find another house.
That's completely understandable in that case. One thing that I will do is I will suggest everyone ask if they're looking at a home with a septic tank. Find out as part of your offer process the last time that it was pumped, and you may want to offer or ask with the additional provisions as part of the offer or as part of the due diligence process that the septic tank be pumped if it's been a while. And always recommend having a septic inspection done. Any other thoughts on that?
Can I add just something real quickly?
Please.
If your client is looking at a property that is on septic, you need to reach out to the county and try to obtain the septic permit. Most of those, at least up here in the Triangle, you can find those online. But if for some reason it's not online, I would reach out to the county and get an email address and try to get something in writing. Until probably about 10 years ago up here in Raleigh, they didn't start keeping septic permits on file all the time. Now every septic permit is on file. But if you were buying a house like built in 40 or 50 or even 85 or something like that, they may not have the septic permit on file. Get that in writing, because you need to be able to show that you tried to get that for your client. The other thing is, if you pull a septic permit and the house is marketed as a 4-bedroom, but the septic permit shows it's a 3-bedroom system, well, you need to have a conversation with your client about that, because you can only market the number of bedrooms that the home perks for. And so if it's a 3-bedroom system, but they're advertising it as a 4-bed, that's wrong. You can only market it as a 3-bedroom system. I always get the septic permit, and when I'm sending my clients the offer documents and disclosures to sign, I have them sign that septic permit as well. If you have a listing, you have a duty to disclose and provide the septic permit. Okay, so if you're on the other side of the table and you're bringing a house to market that's on septic, you need to do everything you can to get the septic permit from the county, put that on the MLS and the documents. If they don't have it, what I try to do is get an email from the county that says, hey, we do not have a septic permit on file for this house. And I PDF that and I put that on the MLS. The reason is the same thing I was just saying. If you're on the other side with the buyer, if you're working for a seller and they say, oh yeah, it's 4-bedroom, we don't have a copy of the septic permit. And then the buyer agent finds a property septic permit and it says 3-bedroom. Well, you've misrepresented the property, and that's a problem for you as an agent.
Yeah, I'm going through that right now. My house that I'm listing in Raleigh was built in 1992, and there is no septic permit in Wake County. I'm not terribly worried about it because it's only a 3-bedroom house, and there really aren't a lot of 2-bedroom septic systems. So I'm still doing what I can, but it does happen where you can't find them. It's just part of the way the world works, especially like Brandon said, for homes that are a little bit older and have been around for a while. Another thing to note that's a common misconception for folks is exactly what that means when something is perked for or permitted for 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms, because they might say, well, it's me and my husband, but we have 4 kids. So do we need a 6-bedroom? No. What the permit means is 2 adults per room. That's the volume that they're talking about when you're looking at a septic permit like that. So just, something to be aware of, to know about, and to be able to speak about, to help ease folks' minds and things of that nature. Good points, Brandon. Thank you. All right, central air and heat pumps. So what's a heat pump? It's your heating and air using electricity and not gas, right? In the north, other parts of the country, gas is really prevalent, right? So a lot of the systems are gas. This can also apply to appliances like your oven and stove. In some places, there are gas washers and dryers, right? Especially your water heater as well can be gas in some areas. This comes down to the municipality thing again. In my neighborhood, where I live, where I'm on septic, we didn't have gas lines to my neighborhood until about a year ago. They ran them to the neighborhood. So we didn't have the option, unless you're going to have a big old LP tank in your yard, to have gas appliances. You know what I mean? So just helping people understand why. Ellen also in her notes made a good point. The gas is going to give it a little more oomph. And for those northern winters, that gas is a really more needed to help keep your place hot, right? Or keep it warm or habitable. Anybody want to add anything else to that?
Doug, I would say that it was really the cost of the system up north. So if you saw a house with a heat pump, your heating bills were like $500-$600 because of the electricity cost to run that, to give the oomph, and you weren't even warm. So it was definitely another taboo. Like, you didn't want that house if it had a heat pump. So
I think generally speaking, and Brandon, you're probably best prepared to speak to this for anybody else here, but I feel like in our area, the costs are going to be relatively similar. whether not mattering if you have gas or electric.
Yeah, I think it's six of one, half dozen of the other in my experience. When it gets cold, your gas bill explodes and your energy goes down. And when it's, June, July, August, September, and it's hot as the surface of the sun outside, you're using way less gas and your energy, your electric bill goes up. So I think it's just a pretty much of a steady balance. We cook, I use a lot of gas and the bill is routinely low. But also, if you're talking to someone that's new construction, most of the new construction homes now are so energy efficient because of the new HVAC systems, the insulation and the windows. So keep that in mind as well, the age of the construction when you're having these conversations with your folks.
Yeah, I think that perception is really important that you just shared, Brandon, when you're working with someone from the north or colder states, whether it's north, west, or Midwest, right? Just helping them understand that the lowest we go here is 30-ish, right? It's not zero here. So the cost is relatively similar in both systems.
That's exactly right. And you may get this question sometimes. I don't get it as much as I did when I was first getting started, when you have all the problems in the world at, like your first 3 transactions. Hey, can I get a copy of the seller's, will the sellers share their average gas or electric bill? If you get those questions, just remind them that, some people leave their house on 68 at night. Mine's not going below 71 because I'm a tightwad. Some people are warm and they keep their house on 83. I never put mine above 73, I think. So, just because their bill is outrageous, they may be using the temperature and the thermostat in a more awkward way than you would. So I always try to remind people of that.
They might be like our parents who move it to 76 when they come and visit.
Yes.
Which is great during the summer. Woo, it's tight during the winter. All right. Anyways, I'm going to add a line in there about gas versus electric appliances, but I think that's all kind of in the same vein, same conversation. Carpet. A lot of folks from a lot of other places are like, carpet, what is this? I want hardwoods. Is it 1970? Get this stuff out of here. Here's the fact of the matter, folks. North Carolina is a big textile state. It was a driving force in the economy for a long time. As such, carpet was everywhere. I've seen it in bathrooms, good God Almighty. But, that's becoming less prevalent as more folks are moving to the area, as new construction explodes. You're really only seeing carpet in bedrooms, maybe playrooms, things like that. You're seeing a lot more hardwood, depending on your price point. And then in the lower price point now, everything is LVP pretty much. So just helping people understand why, if they're looking maybe at an older home, that carpet is so prevalent. If you're looking at newer homes, it's probably not going to be as prevalent anymore. At least that's the way things are trending. But I've certainly had clients come in and say, I don't want a scrap of carpet in the whole house. Hey, I get it. But it's one of those things that's like, hey, you want a fence and there's not a fence, right? You can put a fence in. You can take the carpet out. It's just about understanding where you're flexible and why things are the way they are. Crawl spaces. So in the north.
Hey, can I just say one thing real quick? Sorry to cut you off. About the hardwood flooring. You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but it's slightly different on the text of that document you got shared. I don't know about at the coast. I would imagine it's the same. Up here in the Triangle, $1 million plus homes now routinely have luxury vinyl plank flooring instead of natural hardwoods. Natural hardwoods, you put a dog or a young child on it, I mean, for 5 minutes, and you got to strip it and restain it. A lot of people are going to the LVP just because the product that they make is night and day difference than it was 10 to 12 years ago. Extremely kid and animal friendly and water resistant. And so I've had a couple of people push back on that, and I've showed them online where, routinely $1 million homes have that now as standard. I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Brandon, helping them understand that perspective again of why are we moving and shifting to LVP, right? It is more durable, it lasts longer, and it really can look very similar to a hardwood. And it is not always less costly either. So
you're 100% right, because some of it is really expensive. But to all the points you both made, it's durable, it lasts. You don't have to refinish it, replace it. You know, that's why it's so popular right now. I mean, people want convenience, and not having to replace your floors is pretty convenient. You just have to help people get past their expectations and understand again why, which is what all of this is about, right? Providing value so they understand a different perspective because it's a shift from their expectations. Okay, crawl spaces. So in the north, lots of basements, right? So you don't really have crawl spaces, or maybe the unfinished part of the basement is a crawl space if it's not a heated and conditioned space. In North Carolina, we have a mix of crawl spaces and slab foundation. So the next two things here. Issues people have with slab is, well, guess what? All the plumbing's in the concrete. So if you have an issue with something, they're going to have to bust up into the floor to correct things a lot of times because it's actually in the foundation. The great benefit of a crawl space is typically you crawl in, or in a lot of cases you can walk in, and you have access to the plumbing, electrical, other things overhead. A drawback to that can be, well, if you don't have a moisture barrier, vapor barrier on the ground in the crawl space, then you can set yourself up to water or mold issues in the crawl space. So it's something that has to be maintained like anything else. Also, if you're storing wood on the ground in a crawl space, it can be very attractive to termites, which is something people don't want. So again, this is being able to explain the pros and cons of both, because they both have pros and they both have cons. Generally speaking, the reason you see a lot more slab properties, especially with newer construction being so prevalent, is because it's cheaper. It's just cheaper to put down a slab than it is to build up a crawl space.
And just to sprinkle in that northern perspective, the crawl space, those pipes are exposed. And again, because you have 0-degree weather or even Midwest, right? Pipes freeze quite a bit if you have a crawl space versus that finished basement that's somewhat heated or unfinished, but still has a protective barrier to the exposures, right? So when most folks see the crawl space, they're like, yeah, I don't know if I want that. But here, I find most of the more upgraded luxury homes have a crawl space versus the slab, like you said, it's less expensive. So it's kind of a switch in thinking.
Yeah. And it comes really down to, well, what are you getting here weather-wise? And why is it not an issue to have them exposed? Because we don't have those dramatic temperature drops that could really affect that exposure to the pipes under the house,
right.
Things like that.
You would think they would know that, but a lot of folks that are moving down and haven't spent time here, which a lot of them haven't, surprisingly, right? They don't quite understand the variance in degrees and temperature.
Great perspective. I really am enjoying this conversation. Okay, moving on.
Before we move on, I just have a quick question about like vapor barriers in a crawl space. What other options could you have? You know, can you have like a dehumidifier down to prevent?
Yep.
And sure what are things that people have, I guess, for vapor barriers?
In some instances, there are fully conditioned crawl spaces, which are heated and cooled, temperature regulated, just like your house. Now, when you go under there, it's like the whole thing all the way up is plastic on the walls. So it is, you're not getting the extreme temperatures there because it's getting the same stuff that's in your house. Now, that is the far end of the spectrum. I sold a house that was that way recently, but I don't see a ton of them. And typically you're going to see them at a much higher price point because it's an expensive thing to do. But for example, at the office here in Raleigh, it's on a crawl space. It's an older building, had moisture issues. Okay. It didn't have a vapor barrier when I bought it. So put a vapor barrier down, and it has a dehumidifier in it to kind of regulate that.
To Doug's point, a sealed crawl, the temperature in the sealed crawl is going to be the same temperature that the main level of the house is going to be, because like he said, it is fully conditioned. You do see that a higher price point. Certainly a luxury home should have that. On older homes, you'll see it if they've had moisture or crawl space issues in the past, and the solution was to just go in there and seal the whole thing up. I've sold a couple of those, new construction and redone. That's your best bet. A dehumidifier is not a substitute for a vapor barrier. So if you have a if you don't have a vapor barrier and you think that we'll just plug a dehumidifier in there, that is not a solution. A vapor barrier needs to be in every crawl space. If you still have moisture issues, you add the dehumidifier is the cherry on top of the vapor barrier. You still need the vapor barrier. If the vapor barrier doesn't go the whole, like if it only covers a part of the surface underneath in the crawl, that's better than nothing, but it's not as good as it should be. It should be a vapor barrier that covers the entire footprint of the home under the crawl with no rips in it. People, I missed this, so I'm sorry if I'm retreading. I had to step away for a minute. A lot of people from the north, when they moved down here, they asked me, well, what's better, a vapor crawl space or a slab? It just depends. There's risks with others. You're going to have higher risk of humidity, moisture, pest issues in a crawl space because you've got that space between the ground and the home. Creepy crawlies can get in there. You can get water. With a with a slab, I've heard from a lot of people, especially older people that have mobility or joint issues. It's tougher on their knees and their legs and their ankles and their joints because there's no cushion, right? You're just on a concrete pad on top of planet Earth. The other thing you got to think about is if you have your plumbing that's run through a slab, if you get a water leak or a plumbing issue and they have to go in there and jack up, cut into your slab and move your flooring and do that to solve a water issue, that's going to be a nightmare. For me, that's the number one reason on why a crawl is better. But I could argue either way.
Really good points. And just to recap, Brittany, about the vapor barrier, if you're showing a home with a crawl and it doesn't have one, I would negotiate it as part of the offer, or at least set the expectation that, hey, you need to get this installed as soon as you close on the house. And they don't have to be terribly expensive. I'll be honest with you. It's like a heavy duty trash bag. It's just plastic, but it is important because the ground always has some degree of moisture in it. And when it's enclosed in a space underneath your house, the moisture in that ground can impact your floor joists, the insulation underneath the house. And that's why it needs to be covered to mitigate that. I hope
Okay, yeah, thanks for exploring that a little further for me.
Absolutely. Thank you for
Doug,
asking.
your question, is mold covered, or mold remediation, is that covered on the disclosure statement? Like, does the home have free of mold in the crawl space? That isn't part of the
It should,
question.
mold is on the disclosure.
It is, okay.
Yeah. And a home inspector, if they explore a crawl space, is typically going to point out if they see something that they believe is mold, which you could then do mold testing. Because it's fuzzy, it's growing on the floor joist in some cases. So it's something you can get checked out. Wells, this is another municipality related thing, right? In bigger areas, you've got not just septic or sewer, but you also have water systems, right? That are for the whole town or city or whatever, versus kind of out here in the country. Again, I'm a good example. I'm on well. Now I'm a little bit different because our community has a well, which means it's managed. Aqua is a big company in North Carolina that manages community wells. So they're making sure it's treated and everything, which is great. But so I have a water bill though. Unlike if you're on a private well, you don't have a water bill, but then it's up to you to maintain your well, to make sure it's tested, that the water is clean. All of that falls on you, versus if it's managed, they stay on top of that for you. It's, again, wells and septic go hand in hand a lot for properties. But in some instances, you'll have one and not the other. Typically, if you have one, you'll have community water, but you may not, but you might be on septic. In some instances with some loan types, I believe it's FHA, maybe VA, a well test is required if you're on a well, because they want to see that it's clean. And we'll get to this in a little bit, North Carolina is an as is state, but some loan types aren't going to fund unless some corrections are made, and well can be one of them. Anything to add to that, anybody? Okay, cool. Termites.
Well,
Pest-
real quick, sorry. Depending on your loan type, your lender may require you to get a well inspection, especially if it's FHA, USDA, or VA. So if you're looking at a property for a well, it may be worth your time to proactively ask the loan officer or have your client ask the loan officer if they're going to require a well test. If it's VA, they require the most expensive thorough water test too. It's not the cheap one. So I run into that in the past problematically. So be advised of that.
Yep, I've had the same thing and had to have it treated. Good points. All right, termites. So we all know what the WDIR is, right? The wood destroying insect report. So that's one of the common inspections we always have done in North Carolina. Home inspection, WDIR, and up here we have radon, which we might have skipped over. I'll go back to that. So, termites is to find out if there is active termites or there have been termites, if there's any presence of infestation, active activity or past activity, and then if there's any damage done. In warmer climates like we have, this is more prevalent. A lot of folks have termite bonds, which I do, and it's just part of my regular pest treatment. They come and they spray for spiders and ants and things like that. They knock down the spider webs and stuff outside your house and the wasp nests. And then, they treat regularly for cockroaches, things like that. And then they're also treating for termites. And with that termite bond, it's basically a warranty for your home that you're not going to get termites. And if it is, the company is going to remediate it because that's what they're doing. It's basically an insurance policy against termites for your home. The termite bonds can be transferable. So if your people are buying a property, you always want to check to see if there's an existing termite bond and if it's able to be transferable and how much and for how long. Because you can transfer, a seller can transfer the remainder of the bond term. It could be a month, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, and then your folks can renew it typically. Any questions about that?
No, just something to add, Doug. Like again, that northern or midwestern perception is you don't have regular maintenance for insects or obviously not termites, right? And when you hear that, it's just a little alarming for someone that's been in that area all their life to hear, what do you mean you're treating for termites monthly, right? Or quarterly, right? But they do have big, huge carpenter ants. So sometimes referring to, hey, just like up north and you have the carpenter ants, down here we have other insects that we treat. But for the most part, having a bonded service it just sounds so different from what you experience up north. So it's a good perspective to have to help them understand. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. We're preventing it.
Yeah, and it's such a good thing to have because you do not want termites. Yeah. And the price is relatively tame versus what the cost of repairing damage could be. All right, let me back up really quickly because we skipped over radon. So radon is an invisible gas, right? You can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it, but it can be there. And it's because of rocky soil. All right. So it's very prevalent in areas like the Northeast, Central and East Carolina, or Western North Carolina. Radon can be very prevalent. That's why we test for it. At the coast, blew my mind when I started working in real estate at the coast. We couldn't find anybody to do a radon test. April and I were like, what's happening here? They don't do radon down here? Well, they don't because the soil is really sandy. And so there's not prevalence of radon. It is done with every inspection that we recommend up here. We do home pest and radon because it can cause serious problems. And there is a minimum acceptable amount over which that amount it's recommended that mediation is done, and that can involve a one-time treatment, but most often it's installing a system that regularly treats the air to remove the radon. Where you see it a lot is in basements, because you've got this trap space right above the rocky soil that sometimes is not conditioned. And so it's in the basement, and then it can get up into the home. It's really not a real big difficult thing to install. It's similar to, at least in size, the ones I've seen, to like a dehumidifier. But what it does is it vents to the outside of the house, so it's pulling in the air, scrubbing it, and then getting rid of the bad stuff. Anybody want to add anything to that?
It's easily remediable. Don't be afraid of it. If there is a radon mitigation system in place when you show a home, that's a good thing. That means the seller's already addressed the issue, right? It's no different than having a toilet that leaked and you got a plumber to come in and fix it. If the radon mitigation system is there, you just want to test and make sure that the fan is working correctly. For the triangle agents, downtown Raleigh, if you're looking at a condo in downtown, especially the Fayetteville Street area, 100% it's got high radon. I guarantee you. You sign up for that when you live downtown. You don't have the ability to put a radon mitigation system in PNC Plaza, so you just got to know that going in. Other hotspots are Wake Forest and parts of Durham. Most of Raleigh is fine, but other than those three areas, I very rarely, out of 170 homes sold, I think I've had 5 radon tests that failed.
I can only think of one where we had to have the sellers install a system for my buyers, and it was on a basement.
Hey, question, is it still part of the normal inspection process, or is it only if someone requests it down here?
We are always doing it here,
Always.
not down there. Good question. Just shows you that even within the state, we have differences, right? So you can imagine what it's like for people coming outside of the state. Plumbing, so polybutylene pipes, you'll see 10 disclosures and 9 of them will probably have the I don't know, no representation box checked for the plumbing pipes line in there, because people don't know. I don't know what, my pipes are plastic, whatever, I don't know. The big thing is polybutylene pipes, which are used a lot in the 90s and early 2000s, create a lot of issues. And it's not because of the pipes themselves, it's because of the joints. And the joints tend to leak a lot and cause a lot of issues. So that's kind of a red flag for people when you see that in a property. It's, know that could be an issue if those are prevalent. An inspector should be able to point out the type of pipes if it's not in the disclosure, so your folks are at least aware. And then it's just knowing that they're going to require maintenance, joy of homeownership, and what you're getting when you're dealing with it. They're not using them anymore, but if you're showing a house built in the 90s, it's kind of like some of those cheap siding options. It's something to be aware of.
Yeah. One of the things I would add, Doug, is that insurance wise, you're going to find it very difficult to place insurance or get insurance on that risk, because most insurance carriers will not take a home with the polybutylene pipes.
Got it. Okay, thanks for pointing that out. Okay, roofing. So we do have some extreme weather here, right? And I don't mean like snow and hail, but hurricanes, right? And heat, all those things can impact the roofs. Now, my roof was replaced because of hail damage, right? That happens a lot here. If you're willing to pay your deductible and then have your premium go up, it can be cheaper than replacing a $20,000 or $30,000 roof on your own. Understanding roofing options and dealing with that, shingles are mostly prevalent here. There are architectural shingles. Now they're making shingles that last 40, 50 years. Typically, you would expect a home to roof to last 20 or 30 years. in the past, but they're developing more products. And then there are also options like, metal roofs, which are becoming more prevalent too, although at a much higher price point typically. Our home inspectors are typically doing a visual inspection from the ground. Some use drones. Here's the thing. It's not a bad idea to have a roof inspection specifically done. I typically don't recommend it until after the home inspection is done to see if the home inspector points out any reason for a little bit tighter look at it to find out what's going on. Brandy, you got anything to add to that?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay. HOAs. Who loves HOAs? Nobody, right? I love my HOA. It's $200 a year. It keeps the power on at the sign at the street. That's about it, and we make sure people don't put up the wrong fences. Folks have, different misconceptions for different reasons based on their experience with homeowners associations. I know in some parts of the country, they're ruled with an iron fist. It makes me think of Seinfeld's dad at Del Boca Vista, where they're having the meetings and everything, and they've got the committees and everything, ruling with an iron thumb and kicking people out. In North Carolina, they don't really exist like that. Now, there are some that are a little more heavy-handed, but generally speaking, homeowners associations should be looked at as an organization which, in the long run, protects your property's value. That's the purpose of them. Now, yes, some have restrictions on you can't fly a flag, or you can't leave your garbage cans in the front yard overnight or something like that. But basically what I always tell people is, is to make sure that people don't have the jacked up Camaro on center blocks in the driveway, that people aren't running businesses out of their garage and you got a ton of people coming and going in the neighborhood. It really is about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood and protecting your home value. And prices wildly vary depending on what's covered by the association and specifically what amenities are included in the neighborhood. My neighborhood has no amenities, so it shouldn't be that much per year. Whereas you've got some, now these communities have internet included, and I'm talking single family homes, not just townhomes and condos, but single family homes have internet included in their HOA dues. So it varies, especially with some of these new neighborhoods. So always good to be aware and be able to explain what is included and help justify those costs. One thing to remember when you're looking at attached properties like townhomes and condos, those fees are going to be higher. Not only because typically you're going to have more amenities in neighborhoods like that, clubhouses, pools, gyms, things of that nature, but also because some sort of maintenance of the exterior, maybe just the property itself or the actual grounds, or insurance, a master insurance policy could be included in that. So being able to extrapolate what those different items are that are included in the dues. And, a lot of people will balk at really high HOA dues when it comes to condos. And especially at the beach too, this applies, right? You got $300-500 a month condo dues. Well, your master insurance policy is included in that. And helping people understand that, a lot of times it's really the same out of pocket cost, just instead of paying the insurance, you're paying the HOA because the HOA is paying the insurance bill. And just helping people understand it from that perspective. Y'all got any questions about that or anything else to add? Okay. The offer and purchase process. So obviously due diligence is the big thing that we have to really get ahead of when we're explaining the process to people. And this is what we do. We provide this value. What's our job? To give folks the guidance and knowledge they need to make a comfortable and confident decision. That all starts with explaining the process and setting expectations for how things play out and why they play out that way. So due diligence, is due immediately once we go under contract. And basically the way to explain it is you're buying this time from the seller. They can't sell it to anyone else. So you have the opportunity to do all the inspections you want, have the appraisal done, and then come back and negotiate repairs or some sort of seller concession if necessary. That's a guarantee to the seller that they're compensated for that time that they've taken it off the market if you decide to walk away. Now, you do get credit for that money that you've already paid them at closing, but it is you putting skin in the game. And it's an expectation here. The amount is not set. It will vary depending on price point of the property, location of the property, how long the property's been on the market, if other people are involved and there's multiple offers, right? So being able to explain all that. But it can be tough, especially as a newer agent, especially if you're working with someone who's not used to this. People don't want to put due diligence down. Well, look, unless the property's been on the market for a month and no one is interested, you're going to put due diligence down. So helping them explain that in a way where you're not insulting them, but telling them you're spinning your wheels and wasting your time if you're not willing to do this, because people are not going to work with you. And just understand that that's different here. And I get it, but it's different here. Also, you know, the involvement of attorneys in the process is a little bit different in different parts of the states or in different parts of the country. Here, the agent handles everything until contract, right? And then it goes to the attorney to do the title work, right? And other places, they kind of bring all the parties to the table and then the attorney finalizes the contract. Not surprisingly, closing can take a little bit longer in those places. It's real nice if you've got someone selling their house in New York and having to go through that process while they're trying to buy here and explaining that, hey, we need a 60-day closing because, hey, they're moving from New York and you know how that goes, right? So being aware of that, understanding that process if you've got someone moving from there, but also helping them, if they're not dealing with that, understand that, yeah, typically we can close in about 30 days here because the process isn't as protracted. It's a lot more simplified. Also explaining, you know, the second money that is due when we go under contract and that earnest money piece and how that is refundable up until a certain date, etc. That you also get credit for that. That there usually is a typical amount for that, which is 1%, unless you go really high on the due diligence, in which case you might not have any earnest money or very low earnest money because you're putting everything up front. All the risk is up front. It's not refundable.
Hey, Doug, I wanted to add the due diligence materials that we have. They're really great. And I think they're really highlighted in the strategy session. They're tools that we really can value in our process, because I know when we first moved from Massachusetts to Charlotte, we missed 2 or 3 houses because our agent didn't do a good job in explaining why there is due diligence, like you just explained, right? And it's really important. So it's a differentiator. Like you said, it adds value. And if we can help, in layman's term, just help them get the concept of why it is and how important it is so they can have their offer seen as a more valued offer.
100%. Maybe you're not willing to go up on the purchase price, but are you confident enough that you're going to buy the house that you're willing to put more down in due diligence? That could be a determining factor. We've seen offers that maybe the purchase price wasn't the highest offer, but the due diligence was. Yeah. And the sellers said, you know what, I want to take this guarantee because I know I get this much if they walk away. And heck, if I got a better offer, I can probably relist it and get it again. Mm-hmm. But just understand that.
In my experience, one of the easiest ways to help a buyer understand the importance of due diligence is to simply say, hey, think about it from the seller's point of view, because there's going to come a point in time when you sell this house. Why would you stop showings and quit allowing potential buyers to come in your home and see it with the possibility of them making an offer? Why would you take the house off the market for no compensation at all? Right. And so typically when you have a conversation like that with most people, that helps it kind of trigger, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I just haven't thought of it that way.
A lot of these things that can be objections for people are things that are hard for them to grip. If you flip it to help them understand the other perspective, it can click for them. That is a great approach for a lot of the things that we explain to help them understand why. You know, Why would you take your house off the market for an offer 20K under list price the second day it's on the market? You know, when the comps show that homes sell in less than a week in this neighborhood for above list price. That's where you have to provide the value and knock people's expectations out of the way and help them see what's reality. And if you're not doing that and you're just allowing their expectations to run rampant, then you're not doing your job and you're doing them a disservice because you're not helping them understand the marketplace and the data. And we don't do things by gut or by feeling, right? We show people the data. The market will speak. The market will tell us what's going to happen. It's your job to pull that data and be able to translate it for your folks. Good stuff. All right. As is. Buyer beware, North Carolina. Caveat emptor. Homes are as is in North Carolina. Sellers aren't required to tell you anything about the house. They don't have to represent anything. They can't intentionally misrepresent, but they don't have to represent anything. You know, on the seller's disclosure, yes, no, no representation. And they're not required to make any repairs. They are, however, negotiable. And a lot of times sellers are willing to negotiate either repairs or a seller concession because they want the deal to go through. They don't want to start over. Now, another buyer beware, if you dropped $10,000 in due diligence, I probably wouldn't be expecting a lot of repairs. But that all speaks to what's happening when in that particular point in the market. You know, at the height of COVID, when people were dropping figures on the regular for due diligence, they just knew I'm buying this house regardless. Because if I walk away, I'm walking away from a lot of money. And if you get to that point in a discussion with someone, you know, help them weigh what they've already spent versus the cost of walking away versus the cost of whatever needs fixing. You know, you're going to walk away because of a $5,000 repair, but you're going to walk away from $10,000 worth of due diligence and the $1,000 you've spent on inspections and the $750 you've spent on appraisal, and restart the process and maybe have it happen again on the next house because we don't know until we know. Or you're going to move forward with the house you said you really want, even though you're going to have to deal with these things. Not always a great conversation to have, but an important one because you don't know that they have that perspective and have taken the time to look at it from that point of view. Again, that's our job to explain to them, right, and help them understand all of the angles and options. And not to decide for them, but to make sure that they've considered them, right? Anything else to add there? So along with as is, these two kind of run hand in hand. Passing inspections, you know, home inspections aren't pass fail in North Carolina. They're for informational purposes. I know in some parts of the country, people have home inspections done before you put an offer in on the house. That ain't really happening here. Sellers aren't required to fix any item that is revealed on a home inspection. Again, they are negotiable. And if they're material facts, which a seller and their agent have to reveal if it were to go back to market, you know, sellers are going to be more inclined to go ahead and get it done versus starting over. Again, the whole due diligence thing could play into that, because if you got 15K in due diligence and the repair is 5K, they might just suck it up and they're still at a 10K profit if the buyer walks away. So important to understand that. Other inspections like well or radon will have acceptable levels under which no action is required and above which action is recommended. But if it's a conventional loan and you do those, the loan type is not going to be dependent on funding based on those levels. It's going to be comfort level for the buyer. Like we talked about, some loan types are going to require action being taken to correct maybe a well or a radon level before the loan will fund. And in some cases, the seller can do it. In some cases, the buyer can suck it up and do it before closing to get it done. So good things to all be aware of. Any questions about any of those? No? Okay. Brooke, Brittany, Marcus, Sheila, y'all still with us?
Still here.
Yep, here.
Right. Good
Here.
stuff. Working with, you know, I love the way that you explain this, Ellen. They're like, in the North, they might be like, what are you doing? You know, you're telling me about what agents do? You know, in North Carolina, this is something that new agents really struggle with. You shouldn't. It's simple. Hey, this is a disclosure. I'm required to present it to you. All it does is explain the different types of agency in North Carolina. I'm representing you as a buyer's agent. You see the sign in the yard? That's the listing agent. If somebody called that sign, the listing agent could also represent them as a buyer. That's called dual agency, meaning one agent, both sides of the transaction. On our team, we don't practice that because we believe it's a conflict of interest, that both parties should have their own representation, that there should be a line in the sand. We do practice, however, designated dual agency, meaning an agent from our firm could represent the buyer, an agent from our firm could represent the seller, but never the same agent representing both sides. Any questions about that? Okay, please sign this to indicate that I've explained it to you so I have it for your files. That's it.
Just a comment, I've used it kind of as a quiver to get to buyer agency, because a lot of folks think their perception is they can go to the open houses and those agents, they won't sign with anyone because they'll just keep bumping around until they find the right house, and they'll get a better deal if they're going to get the seller agency will represent them as well. Because again, in many states, especially up north, that can happen and it's allowed, right? So, and that's what people do up north. But we're here, I just explained that whole process that you just did and say that here, very few agencies, you're going to have the same agent. Well, you can't have the same agent. You just can't. Up north, you can. You can have one, the seller agent can represent the buyer. It's crazy, but that's how the way it goes. So helping them understand that and helping them understand that you can actually, as a buyer agent, get them into any house that they see or any house that you present to them. It's not, the seller agent doesn't own the house per se or the showings, just helping them understand that. And most of the time when I walk through that, it's easier to get buyer agency. Again, I'm only a couple of months into this, but it just seems to help them understand the perspective down here versus in other states.
That's a great point to make. Now, an agent can represent both sides in North Carolina. It is allowed. The dual agency is allowed. Also, an exclusive right to sell or exclusive agency agreement exists where a listing agent can say, only I can represent the buyer also.
Right.
Now, that's not widely done, but it is allowed in North Carolina. You just don't see it. Really, the crux of the conversation is the seller has representation. The seller and the listing agent negotiated a fee to pay a buyer agent because they want the buyer to also be represented, because they realize without representation on both sides of a transaction, it's much more likely to fall apart. And people want to get to the closing table. And that's why it's set up this way. And that's why the listing agent is offering to pay my fee as a buyer agent as part of the total compensation they're receiving from the seller.
That's great, Doug.
Meaning you don't pay me anything.
Yeah.
And just help them understand that. Really good way to talk through that. And it's important to be able to explain that, especially again, for the purpose of this meeting, people who are used to a different setup, right? And then getting to the buyer agency part, helping them understand again why it exists, that the seller's preference, the reason they picked a listing agent and the reason they're offering a buyer agent commission amount is because they want both sides to be fully represented. And while it is allowed in North Carolina for one agent to represent the seller and the buyer at the same time, speaking to you, Mr. and Miss Buyer, it behooves you not to be represented by the person also representing the seller, because in that instance, they're really not negotiating for you. They're mediating between two parties. And don't you think you deserve your own individual representation? That's all I got on that one. Anybody have anything else to add?
Can I touch on one thing real quick? HOAs, I had to step away because I'm having
Yeah.
some work done here at the house. When I list a property as a seller's agent in a HOA, you guys have all written offers before on properties that are in a HOA to represent a buyer, and the HOA documents, you can't find them. It's a freaking nightmare. And the seller agent doesn't have them on the MLS. I always try to find them and include those in the MLS documents when I'm listing a property in the HOA. If I don't download all the files, because sometimes there's a trillion of them, I'll put a link to the website in the agent remarks. But I also try to email the property manager for the HOA. I find that information by looking at prior disclosures of recently listed homes. I always send them a template email and say, hey, the sellers of XYZ Main Street have hired me to represent them and sell their property. Can you confirm the following things: the monthly or the HOA due, and how periodically it is due. If there are any restrictions on open houses, if there are any restrictions on parking, if there are any restrictions on signage, and if there are any pending or proposed special assessments. I'll always ask those questions in case the sellers are out to lunch and they don't know, or they're not paying attention. I don't know how common it is down there. Up here, like the neighborhood I live in, I can't put an Ocean Air Realty sign out for a listing. I have to have a special sign made by the HOA. So I just think it's a good practice to get in the habit of doing.
I
Good.
totally echo that. Being on the board of the HOA, so many people wait till the very end to contact us on what the fees are. I don't know how they're putting it in MLS. They're just probably going by the whatever the homeowner's telling them what the fees are. But a lot of times their contacts at the end, they may even have dues that are in behind. So getting ahead of it is a really great idea.
And also, check other listings that are currently on the market or have recently been on the market in the neighborhood if you're having trouble finding documents, things of that nature. Also, of utmost importance, if there's some sort of road agreement, because that can be a non-starter for VA loans if there's not a road agreement in place and the roads aren't maintained by the HOA or by the municipality, et cetera. I was really looking forward to this because it brought up a lot of different things that we kind of talk around, but you don't talk about it kind of as a group. You talk about it with your clients individually. So hopefully this will put all of us in a better position, not just to help people that are moving from out of the area, but people who have never been through the process before. Everything we do is about relationships and providing value, right? And we're not door openers. We're not, hey, you like this house? Hey, you want to see this house? Hey, you want to write an offer on this house? That's the easy part, folks. This is the work, all right, where you're providing value and helping people understand what they're getting themselves into and setting them up for a successful process. That's the job that we do. And you have to be there and be ready to have these conversations, explain these things, help people understand not just that they're in place, but also some of the reasoning behind it to help them feel more comfortable about this new place that they're moving to. I hope this has helped all of you, put all of you in a better position to do that. And of course, we're free to talk about this more. I will post this to our YouTube page, so it'll be there as a reference on the mastermind playlist. And I will send out the supplement too, so everybody has it handy. Anything else? You guys have a great day. Thanks so much for your participation and have a great prospecting day tomorrow. I'll see you then.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, bye.
Bye, y'all.